If you've been eating fruit every morning because someone told you it was healthy, I need you to stop and watch this, because what I'm about to share with you has completely changed the way I counsel my patients over 60. And it took me years of clinical work to understand why so many of them were doing everything right on paper and still declining mentally. They were eating salads, they were taking walks, they were drinking their orange juice every single morning, and yet something was going wrong inside the brain. Quietly, invisibly. And the 5 fruits at the center of this conversation are ones you probably have in your kitchen right now. I want to be clear about something first. Fruit is not poison. But for people over 60, especially those already noticing changes in memory and mental sharpness, certain fruits can trigger a specific biological cascade that accelerates exactly the kind of damage you're trying to prevent. And here's what makes this so important. The mechanism I'm about to describe has nothing to do with the fruit itself. It has everything to do with what your aging brain does with the sugar inside it. And that difference is something most doctors will never explain to you in a 10-minute appointment. I've been working with patients over 60 for decades, and the pattern I've seen over and over again is this. The person who walks into my office with memory concerns is usually not someone who has been neglecting their health. They're someone who thought they were doing the right things. And that's what makes this so heartbreaking, because the damage doesn't announce itself. You don't feel it happening. You just start noticing that you walked into the kitchen and forgot completely why you went in there. Or you're in the middle of a sentence and the word, a word you've used your whole life, just disappears. Or you read the same paragraph 3 times and nothing sticks. And every single time that happens, there's a voice in the back of your mind that asks the question you're terrified to answer. Is this how it starts? I want you to know something. That fear is not irrational. It is the most rational response in the world to what you are experiencing. More than 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's right now. That number is expected to double by 2050. And the research is increasingly clear that the damage doesn't begin when the diagnosis is made. It begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier, in the form of silent inflammation, oxidative stress, and something called insulin resistance in the brain. And that last one, insulin resistance in the brain, is exactly where those 5 common fruits come back into the picture. But here's what I need you to stay with me for, because this is where it gets really surprising. And I'll come back to that mechanism in just a moment. First, I want you to understand what is actually happening inside your brain as you get older, because nobody explains this clearly. Your brain has approximately 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others through synapses, tiny electrical junctions where signals jump from one cell to the next. Memory works when those connections are fast, clean, and well-maintained. Think of it like a city with millions of roads connecting every neighborhood. When those roads are clear, information moves instantly. Names, faces, dates, words, they arrive on demand. But when damage begins, it's like a slow storm moving through the city. Roads get blocked, detours multiply, and eventually some connections just stop functioning entirely. 3 processes drive this destruction simultaneously. The first is neuroinflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation inside brain tissue itself. The immune cells of the brain, called microglia, become hyperactivated and begin attacking healthy neurons. The second is oxidative stress, decades of free radical accumulation that damages the membranes of neurons and disrupts energy production at the cellular level. Your brain consumes 20% of all the energy your body produces. When that energy system starts failing in brain cells, your thinking slows and your memory starts to falter. The third, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, is a deficit in acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter responsible for memory and learning. After 60, it declines significantly. And when it drops, so does your ability to form new memories, retrieve stored ones, and concentrate for any meaningful length of time. Now, here's where the fruit comes back in. And I want you to pay close attention to this, because I have never heard this explained clearly to a patient outside of a clinical setting. The brains of people over 60, especially those with any degree of pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome, or even sustained elevated fasting glucose, have developed something researchers now call cerebral insulin resistance. What that means is this: the neurons in your brain have become less responsive to insulin signals. And since insulin is the key that unlocks the door to allow glucose into brain cells, those cells begin to starve, even when blood sugar is technically normal, even when your last physical showed nothing alarming. Now think about what happens when you eat a high fructose fruit first thing in the morning. Mango, grapes, pineapple, watermelon, dried fruits like raisins and dates. The fructose in these fruits does not raise blood glucose the same way glucose does, and that's exactly why people think they're safe. But fructose is processed almost entirely by the liver. And in large amounts, it drives something called de novo lipogenesis. It converts directly to fat, and it directly promotes insulin resistance at the cellular level over time. It also produces uric acid as a byproduct, which generates oxidative stress, and it bypasses the satiety hormones that would otherwise tell your brain you've had enough. The result is a pattern of repeated metabolic insults, morning after morning, that quietly worsen the very insulin resistance that is already starving your neurons. I've seen this destroy cognitive health gradually over years, and it didn't have to happen. Now, I want to be honest with you. This is not a reason to fear all fruit forever. But for someone over 60 who is already noticing cognitive changes, the combination of cerebral insulin resistance and daily high fructose fruit consumption is the equivalent of slowly draining the fuel tank of a brain that is already running on reserve. And that is serious. That is the kind of thing I wish I could tell every patient I see before it reaches the point of no return. If what I'm sharing today is new to you, and I suspect it is, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I release critical health information for people over 60 every week, information your doctor may not have time to share in a routine appointment. Hit the subscribe button below. It costs nothing, and it could be one of the most important health decisions you make today. Now let me tell you about a patient. I'll call him Harold, 71 years old, retired engineer, sharp man, extraordinarily sharp his whole career. He came to me after his wife called me directly, concerned. She said Harold had started forgetting names, not strangers' names, family names. He'd gotten lost driving home from the grocery store he'd used for 15 years, and he was hiding it. She'd seen him writing names on sticky notes and hiding them around the house. Harold sat in my office and told me he'd been eating well, exercising, taking a multivitamin, having a fruit smoothie every morning, mango, pineapple, a handful of raisins. He was doing everything right, except that smoothie, every single morning, was feeding a metabolic process that was worsening the one thing threatening his mind. We made changes, targeted, specific changes, and within several months, his wife called me again. Different tone entirely. Harold's story is not unique. I have seen versions of it hundreds of times, and what it illustrates is something that keeps me up at night about the current state of health advice for people over 60. The general guidance, eat more fruit, eat less fat, take a walk, is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete because the brain after 60 operates under different rules, and nobody is telling you what those rules are. This isn't just about forgetting where you put your keys. I want you to understand what is actually at stake when cognitive decline goes unaddressed. It starts with the small things, the word that won't come, the room you walked into for a reason you can't recall. But here's how it progresses if the underlying damage continues unchecked. Concentration becomes harder, reading becomes effortful, conversations in groups become exhausting because you can't keep track of who said what. You start avoiding social situations, not because you don't want to be there, but because the fear of being exposed is worse than the loneliness. And then the isolation itself accelerates the decline. Research consistently shows that social isolation increases dementia risk by 50%, roughly equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. So the very thing the declining brain makes you want to do is the thing that makes it worse. And then there is the emotional weight of this, the shame, the hiding. The elaborate strategies you develop to cover what's happening so that your children don't find out, so your spouse doesn't see it. I've had patients tell me they haven't had a quiet night of sleep in 2 years because every time they close their eyes, the question is there. Is this Alzheimer's? Am I already losing myself? That kind of sustained anxiety is not weakness. It is the rational response to real fear, and it deserves a real answer. The link in the description below takes you directly to the natural cognitive support formula I recommend to my patients. It combines everything I've covered today in the specific forms that actually reach brain tissue. Take a look when you have a moment. I think it will make a lot of sense after what you just learned. Now, let me tell you what the research says can actually support the brain's own defense systems, because there is genuinely good news here, and it comes from the neuroscience itself. The first compound I want to tell you about is Bacopa monnieri. This is an herb with thousands of years of use in Ayurvedic medicine, and it is now one of the most rigorously studied natural compounds for cognitive function. Multiple randomized controlled trials support its role in memory and cognitive performance. What makes it particularly relevant is that it works on several pathways at once. It inhibits the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, which means more of that critical memory neurotransmitter stays available in the brain. Simultaneously, it reduces neuroinflammation and protects neurons from oxidative damage. In clinical terms, it addresses three of the core processes I described earlier in a single compound. The second is lion's mane mushroom, Hericium erinaceus. This one generates genuine excitement in the neuroscience community for a very specific reason. It is the only natural compound identified so far that stimulates the production of nerve growth factor, NGF. NGF is the protein your brain requires to maintain, repair, and grow neurons. Published research demonstrates that lion's mane stimulates NGF synthesis directly in neuronal cells. Most people have never heard of NGF, but the researchers who study neurodegeneration think about it constantly because it is part of the brain's own repair infrastructure, and supporting it may be one of the most important things a person over 60 can do for long-term cognitive health. The third compound is phosphatidylserine. This is a phospholipid that makes up a significant portion of the cell membrane of every neuron in your brain. As we age, levels decline, and with them, the efficiency of cellular communication between neurons. What is remarkable about phosphatidylserine is that it holds an FDA-qualified health claim for cognitive function support, one of the very few natural compounds that does. It supports the structural integrity of neuron membranes and the function of neurotransmitter receptors embedded in those membranes. And then there is the relationship between vitamin B12 deficiency and cognitive decline, one of the most documented and most ignored relationships in all of geriatric medicine. After 60, the stomach produces less intrinsic factor, the protein required to absorb B12 from food. The result is a slow, invisible deficiency that damages the myelin sheath surrounding neurons. Think of those neurons as electrical wires. The myelin is the insulation. When insulation deteriorates, signals get lost. Every message the brain tries to send slows down or never arrives. B12 deficiency affects up to 40% of adults over 60, and in many cases, it is a completely reversible contributor to cognitive decline if it is caught in time. Finding each of these compounds separately, in the right forms, the right doses, and the right combinations, is genuinely difficult. Most people over 60 don't have the time, the access, or the background to put this together on their own. That's why I've left a link in the description to a formula that brings all of this together. I've reviewed it carefully, and it is one of the few options I feel comfortable recommending to my patients. Now, why hasn't your doctor told you any of this? I want to be direct about this because it is important, and it is not a conspiracy. The medical system is built around diagnosable conditions and pharmaceutical interventions. A doctor with a full caseload and a 10-minute appointment window does not have time to walk you through the metabolic mechanisms of cognitive aging or the research on natural neuroprotective compounds. It is a system problem, not a failure of individual physicians. But the result is that millions of people over 60 are navigating this terrain completely alone and suffering unnecessarily. You are not powerless here. That is what I need you to take away from everything I've shared today. Your brain retains a remarkable capacity for adaptation, what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. The right nutritional support, the right metabolic awareness, the right compounds given in the right forms, these things matter. The research says so. My years of clinical practice say so. And the next time you reach for that morning fruit, the mango, the pineapple, the handful of raisins, I want you to remember what I shared today, not to create fear, but because you now understand something that most people your age will never learn. You understand the mechanism, and understanding the mechanism means you can change the outcome. If today's video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone you care about. Because there are millions of people over 60 dealing with this silently, and they don't have to. The link in the description goes directly to the natural formula I recommend. Take a look when you have a quiet moment. Subscribe for more critical health information every week, and leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? I read every single one.